Here's a new recap on OKTV Today YouTube channel. In this recap we dive into True Detective, Night Country episode 1 to 6. The series has returned after a long 6-year break, and it's stranger than before. Additionally, there is a distinct sense of comedy to all of this gloom, much like another prestige mystery that aired after a long gap. We return to small-town life in the opening episode of Season 4, this time in the made-up town of Ennis, Alaska, where local detective Liz Danvers, Jodie Foster and her outcast police colleagues are dispatched to look into the disappearance of 8 men at a neighboring research station. Perplexed by what she discovers, Liz calls in fellow investigator Evangeline Navarro, Carly Rice, an old co-worker and foil, who believes there may be more to the case. These concerns are swiftly validated by a number of eerie incidents that occur during the episode. The bleak darkness of the Alaskan tundra seems unavoidably chilly, but not cold enough to stop us from being intrigued by what the heck just occurred. A scene at the Salal Arctic Research Station opens the premiere, where 8 scientists are gathering samples of old Alaskan ice to test, for what, we don't yet know. Alaska just saw its last sunset of the year, a state that endures around 60 days of total darkness from December to January. Following a tough workday, the researchers are relaxing by watching Ferris Bueller's Day Off and performing chores.
These are the cells I could find. This one was cheap.
Word'll spread.
Fresh, but Mayo's dad. Was he Pete? At least.
A brief, standing seizure is now being experienced by one of the men's colleagues. Before the power goes out, the seizing guy frightfully responds, "She's awake," when his colleague asks him if he's okay after he stops shaking. A supply stockist discovers the station deserted 3 days later, in the middle of the constant night, as the Ferris Bueller parade scene plays repeatedly in the common area. He's scanning the area to see if anyone else is present when something passes by down a hallway and out of his line of sight. In the kitchen of the station, the sole indication of human existence is a severed tongue under a table. Danvers quickly joins fellow cops Hank and Peter Pryor, played by John Hawkes and Finn Bennett, a father and son investigative team, at the scene. True Detective, Night Country has a close-knit atmosphere because of this warped familial dynamic, which reflects the sense of familiarity small-town dwellers experience with their neighborhood. Danvers informs Peter that she can identify an Alaskan native woman's tongue by the indentations on it. According to Danvers, repetitive behavior, it comes from licking the thread while fixing the fishing nets. Navarro is waiting in her office when Danvers returns to the station. Knowing precisely what she's going to say, Danvers responds, "It's not her tongue." Navarro believes this was related to a cold case she was dropped 6 years ago, which included Ann Masu Kautok, a murdered native woman. When her body was discovered, Kautok had been beaten and had lost her tongue. However, Danvers stops Navarro and leaves to go to a friend's house to pick up her adoptive daughter Leah, Isabella Starr LeBlanc. Danvers and Leah are traveling home when they are involved in a collision with Stacy, a fellow local who is driving under the influence. After Danvers tosses Stacy into the inebriated tank, the scene is twisted into something odd and gloomy. The entire building is filled with Stacy's unearthly crying noises as she bangs on the door. Danvers tells them both, "I'm not letting a still drunk DUI out just because sometimes she blows you," in response to Hank's attempt to let her go so that everyone at the station may stop their suffering.
Crazy, so
It's all good.
you'll talk to him, explain why.
Work.
Work ends at 6.
Hey, it's fine.
Really blue.
The sequence concludes on a humorously odd note as Stacy begins to yell and pound once again. Although Pete Solato is only executive producing this season, writer-director Issa Lopez seems to be using the same Lynchian cloth that the series' creator was before it began. It's a spooky, humorous scene. The only way Peter can get Ann Masu Kautok's cold case file out of Hank's house, as requested by Danvers, is by snatching an old photo to show his son. As they hold the files securely, Danvers informs Peter that Ann was stabbed 32 times and that her body was discovered outside of the native communities. Activist and protester Ann gained a lot of enemies over her lifetime. After Navarro developed an obsession with the case and began to harass influential local figures, Danvers decided to remove her from the investigation and assign her to patrol trooper status.
Yeah, I don't want to go blind yet.
Hey,
No. Understood.
Merry Christmas, motherfucker.
Danvers dreams later that night that a hand touches her shoulder as she sleeps, and the kid murmurs the words the guy at the Salal station spoke right before he vanished. She's awake. She discovers a plush polar bear on her floor with one of its black bead eyes removed when she wakes up. While on patrol, Navarro is also contacting former Cowtop case contacts to inquire about their knowledge of the Salal station. She also hears a voice on her vehicle radio exclaim, "She's awake," at the utterance of the station name, and then she sees a real one-eyed polar bear walking through the town's streets. Rose Aguino, Fiona Shaw, is working on skinning a deer in front of her house just outside of town when her radio malfunctions. As she looks around, she sees the phantasm of Travis, a deceased acquaintance, calling out to Rose to follow him into the snow. As they get closer to the Arctic Circle, Travis halts, makes a forceful motion with his body, and then gestures for Rose to follow. Danvers is notified shortly after that the 8 scientists who went missing from Salal station have been located. Rose informs police that Travis led her to the bodies when she and Navarro arrive at the murder site. Rose just responds, "I know," to Navarro's response that Travis is dead. The dead are discovered frozen with a terrified scream on their faces, buried up to their necks in the snow and ice. One of the numerous mysteries that haven't been resolved this season is how they got there.
Is it?
Pressure?
You think? Hey, no photos! Delete that right!
True Detective, Night Country's second episode was jam-packed with narrative, a startling nod to Season 1, and Jodie Foster using the phrase, "shit bowl." 9 Soviet hikers were discovered freezing to death in the Ural Mountains in 1959 after rushing out of their encampment and tearing down tents as though they were non-existent. Because of acute hypothermia, which may fool people into thinking they're incredibly hot, the bodies were half nude and terribly damaged. Authorities, scholars, and conspiracy theorists were all baffled by the occurrence that became known as the Dyatlov Pass tragedy for decades. What had compelled those men and women to abandon their camp in such desperation on that tragic night? Was it a bear? A moose? Had one of them become an insane murderer? Many people nowadays, at least those whose viewpoints we should regard, appear to think that the Soviet hikers' fatalities were caused by an avalanche. Nevertheless, the tale of Dyatlov Pass still inspires artists all throughout the world. The aftermath of the discovery of all the men's deaths from Salal Station is where True Detective, Night Country Season 4 Episode 2 opens. The inquiry is made considerably more challenging by the fact that they are all frozen together. One of the frozen men's hands is inadvertently broken off by one of the cops, and the ostensibly dead body awakens with a scream. Bryce, the local geology professor, is in the middle of a class when Danvers stops by. To get his opinion on the Salal research station's goal,
Proper handling of frozen... Captain, sir?
Right.
Now, did you see the manager?
Ma'am?
How's Pete? You didn't come talk to me unless this was really serious.
So horrible.
Danvers forces all of his pupils to leave the classroom. In addition to her own sister's visions and other issues, Navarro is talking to Rose about her own visions of her deceased son, Travis. Rose is sure that mental health issues and paranormal activity are not the same thing. Rose highlights a crucial detail: one of the deceased men's forehead had a spiral marking on it. Navarro knows about it, but he doesn't know what it all implies. Bryce and Danvers carry on talking about the case. He informs Danvers that the men on the Salal station were trying to duplicate the DNA of a long-extinct microbe that might be able to stop cell deterioration. She begs him to make the explanation simpler, and in essence, they were looking for a treatment for genetic diseases, cancer, and other illnesses. And it may transform the game if they were successful. Why was it taking so long? Wonders Danvers. Captain Ted Connolly has arrived and wants to move the inquiry over to Anchorage, but Danvers must return after being stopped by a call from the station. Danvers contends that Connolly assigned her to Ennis, thus it's her case even if the police station and forensic department are better prepared. By claiming that the remains must be thawed before being relocated, she deftly creates a way to keep them. It will take 48 hours to thaw. She has 48 hours to provide Connolly with proof that he shouldn't transfer the case to Anchorage. Danvers suggests that the dead guys be thawed at the nearby skating rink. Kate, who works for the mining business that owns the rink, greets us. As it turns out, Danvers and her husband are at odds because she had an affair with him. But in order to help with the inquiry, Kate sets aside her animosity for Danvers. When Navarro shows up and says she wants to be involved in the investigation, Peter assists Danvers in looking into the bodies after they have been relocated to the ice rink. She points out that Annie's corpse has a spiral marking that is identical to one on one of the males. Navarro believes the Salal guys have something to do with Annie's passing. Danvers tells Navarro to go since he doesn't want to work with her. In the meantime, Peter uses the frozen man's face to unlock one of the men's phones via the facial recognition feature. In episode 1, it was found that Annie was wearing the same parka as Raymond Clark, one of the scientists whose coat is missing. Navarro discusses this with Annie's brother, Ryan. Ryan is unaware of Clark's background, but Chuck, a co-worker, stops him and examines the picture of the man Navarro is with. Before Navarro can ask any questions, a brawl breaks out in the pub where Chuck and Clark are. Danvers and Peter are rehashing the case thus far back at the skating rink. They come to the conclusion that someone is out there committing murders in order to accomplish some kind of objective. It doesn't make sense, according to Peter, but Danvers remarks that the sense is hidden in the details. Peter plays a video on one of the men's phones for Danvers, capturing the moment when Clark snapped and said the words, "She's awake."
Self-inflicted wounds.
Okay. They're hypothermia, they feel hot, they undress. Well, they're freezing to death. 3 shoes are missing.
Okay.
They run out in the ice without any shoes. So maybe the killer folded taunting them.
You get the supply guy.
Get those big boys, you dummy.
Danvers asks the Salal cleaning staff questions. It seems that Clark, who had the spiral tattooed on his breast, liked to go around nude. In another scene, Navarro goes to see Chuck to inquire about his knowledge of Raymond Clark. Chuck claims that Clark paid cash for his cousin's trailer. Chuck grudgingly writes his cousin's name in her notepad after describing the trailer. Navarro confronts him about his indifference to Annie's passing. Hank realizes that Peter has stolen Annie's file on Danvers' instructions after seeing it is gone. Peter and Danvers are still trying to piece things together. According to Peter, Salal has stakes in a wide range of assets and is financed via a shell corporation known as NC Global Strategies. When Peter steals Annie's case file, Hank encounters him at the ice rink and gives him a hard blow. When Danvers shows up to Connolly's house, it's the biggest surprise of the episode. As it happens, their affair has lasted for around 19 years. After they have sex, Connolly attempts to persuade Danvers to give Anchorage the case, but she storms out, stating that they shouldn't go on with the affair. Danvers returns to the workplace and speaks with Raymond Clark's tattoo artist, who applied the spiral design. Since there is unmistakably a connection to Annie's murder, Danvers addresses Navarro. Since Navarro is so familiar with the case, Danvers grudgingly consents to collaborate with her on it. Navarro discovers later that the trailers she is investigating are parked in a location known as the Nook. She locates a trailer that fits Chuck's description when she pulls over. Danvers joins Navarro at the Nook as the episode comes to a close. They discover that there are several materials about witchcraft and black magic in Clark's trailer. When Peter phones Danvers to inform her that the mound of frozen bodies has thawed and there are only 6 of them, meaning one guy is missing, he scuttles this revelation. Raymond Clark is, of course, that one man. Navarro believes that Clark is still alive and somewhere in the world. However, the mystery that is developing in True Detective, Night Country is not diminished by this strangely positioned fiasco. Danvers, Navarro, and Pryor still need hints to piece together a coherent image. Even the video of Clark stating, "She's awake," and the accounts of the service providers who witnessed his odd behavior before chaos broke out are insufficient to explain anything. The only reason Danvers was able to keep the remains in Ennis now was a technicality. Connolly will have to wait for them to thaw, which should take 48 hours. It appears that it will take much more than 2 days to solve this issue. Unfortunately, it is likely that we will have to witness Danvers battling for her right to work on it once more in a few episodes.
Nice. Used to dance to this. They used to love to dance.
I don't know. He wasn't
Good enough.
Watching porn?
No,
I don't have anything. About the Clark thing, I mean, the right question is, fuck.
Liz is upset because her stepdaughter Leah, Isabella Starr LeBlanc, is celebrating her culture with a temporary facial tattoo, and Hank is overtly antagonistic against the indigenous community. Liz makes Leah scrape it off in this episode. It's an inexplicable overreaction, particularly from a white woman. The lack of resources to conduct a more thorough investigation has been one of Liz and her team's main challenges in this case. A snowfall caused Peter to ask his veterinary cousin to investigate the corpuscle instead of flying in a forensic specialist. The veterinarian concludes that the males most likely died from cardiac arrests caused by pure panic and that they passed away before they froze. Oliver Tagak, a former equipment engineer, is ultimately located by Navarro and Liz in a nomadic settlement. They inform him that every scientist he collaborated with has passed away. He expresses amazement and distress at this news, but he also explicitly inquires about the director and founder of the Solar Research Station, Anders Lund, Orsten Bachmann. Other than Clark, Lund is the only scientist still alive. Lund, who was discovered amid the corpse, had suffered from gangrene, many amputations, and vision loss before being placed in a medically induced coma. Liz and Navarro pay him a visit in the hospital in this episode. He informs them between his cries of agony. She is currently out on the ice after we woke her up. In the dark, she came for us. There have been rumors that she is awake since the first episode. Part 3 of True Detective, Night Country, has demonstrated how Navarro is somehow directly connected to all of this magic, mystery, and terror. She admits to Liz at the start of the show that she frequently considers simply leaving. Navarro tells her lover, Eddie Kavik, Joel D. Montgrand, who owns the bar and cafe in Ennis, that her mother never gave her an indigenous name before her disappearance. She is still hurt by this lack of connection, particularly after talking to Oliver, who says she has lost her identity. After landing on the ice, Navarro gets a vision of a toddler wearing pajamas and holding a plush polar bear, along with information about her mother. The plush bear Liz had hidden in a box at home is a replica of the one-eyed polar bear she saw in town. Additionally, Jules, Navarro's sister, yells and says, "Someone is coming," after an outburst at work in this episode. All of this leads us to the episode's closing sequences. Liz and Navarro are noticeably upset when Lund informs them, "We woke her up." Later, a drugged Lund gets up from his bed, pointing and talking directly to Navarro as Liz leaves his room to handle the turmoil in the hospital waiting area. "Hey Evangeline, your mom is waiting for you," he adds. "Hello," she says. Lund seems to die after laying down again after providing the warning. After breaking into Annie's smartphone, which was discovered in Clark's trailer, Navarro and Liz view a video of Annie in what looks to be an ice cave in the last scene of Part 3. "I found it," she murmurs in the video. "If something were to happen to me." The show essentially ends when Annie lets out a spine-tingling scream before she can finish speaking.
Later.
No, he didn't.
In True Detective, Night Country, Rose, Fiona Shaw, the resident of Ennis who escorted the police to the scientist's corpse, cautions Evangeline Navarro, Carly Rice against becoming embroiled in the case in the second episode. Tragically, Rose's advice was ignored by Navarro. Attracted to the case and intent on linking it to a 6-year-old cold case, the murder of indigenous midwife and activist Annie Kautok, Navarro has thrown herself into the inquest, even reuniting with her bitter rival, Ennis Chief of Police Liz Danvers, Jodie Foster. The 8 men who disappeared from the nearby Arctic research station in the made-up mining town of Ennis, Alaska, appear to be the main mystery at the heart of True Detective, Night Country. In the 6 years following her murder, Annie Kautok's tongue was left at the station, strangely in excellent condition. The viewer finds out in episode 2 that Annie had been having a covert affair with Raymond Clark, Owen McDonnell, one of the scientists who was the only one not discovered among his frozen colleagues. But as episode 3 has shown, we haven't fully unraveled this riddle yet. While revealing a spiritual aspect of this case that appears to be closely related to Ennis' past and Navarro's familial heritage, Part 3 also resolves some of the tension from Liz and Navarro's pasts.
Broken arm. She was drunk, officer. Navarro couldn't get over it. All right, go on.
True Detective, Night Country, begins its third chapter in the past. Annie trespasses in the mine, so Navarro goes to arrest her. She interrupts a delivery at an indigenous women's birthing facility while on her search. For Navarro, it's a terrifying situation, mostly since Annie needs some time to get the newborn baby breathing. It does, however, raise awareness of Annie's work among the audience. Indigenous people in Ennis are suffering greatly as a result of the mine and its conditions. A growing number of women are stillborn, and many families have black water flowing through their pipes. Captain Hank Pryor, John Hawkes, who has previously shown signs of violence, has gone renegade on the fifth day of the night. He has assigned himself to lead the police task group that is looking for the missing scientist, Clark. However, he has enlisted his redneck, gun-wielding civilian cronies for a full-fledged manhunt, as is customary with Hank. Liz is a liar, although Navarro may be good at concealing aspects of herself. Liz tells Hank's son, police officer Peter Pryor, Finn Bennett, about their most recent case together before Navarro was compelled to move to the troopers in response to his inquiry regarding the conflict between her and Navarro. Liz informs Peter that the victim and the offender, who had a history of domestic abuse, were both dead when she and Navarro arrived at the site of the murder, suicide. A flashback, however, demonstrates it to be untrue. What really transpired to cause Liz and Navarro's professional relationship to go apart, and why is Liz so steadfast in her false narrative? Peter questions his father about Navarro and Liz later in the show, but Hank sidesteps the question. When the motley law enforcement squad is forced to collaborate on this case, local hairdresser Susan tells them that she introduced Annie and Clark, giving them further insight into their connection. Susan notes that although she doesn't know why, Annie was adamant about keeping the connection a secret. We also discover that Annie started having dreams about the swirl sign when she was a teenager, which is the same symbol that was tattooed on one of the frozen scientists' foreheads and worn by Annie and Clark. Two important aspects are revealed to Navarro by her questioning of Susan. First of all, Hank has always been aware of Annie and Clark's connection, but he chose not to disclose it because of his bigotry and misogyny. Second, Salal had heard about Annie and Clark from another person at the science station. According to Susan, she dated Oliver Tagok, an equipment engineer, but he disappeared just before Annie passed away. More information about Navarro's history is revealed in this episode. Like her sister Jules, aka Niviana, her mother, whom we have seen in flashbacks, suffered from a mental illness. Navarro's mother, who was born and reared in Ennis, traveled to Boston when she was 15 years old and became involved with Navarro's violent and intoxicated father. She was later slain even though she ultimately left the relationship and returned to Ennis with her daughters. The case was never solved, just like Annie.
They're gonna try again tomorrow.
No?
Well,
Cool. You tell me something.
fuck you,
Your mom.
Boston. Boom.
Liz is upset because her stepdaughter Leah, Isabella Starr LeBlanc, is celebrating her culture with a temporary facial tattoo, and Hank is overtly antagonistic against the indigenous community. Liz makes Leah scrape it off in this episode. It's an inexplicable overreaction, particularly from a white woman. The lack of resources to conduct a more thorough investigation has been one of Liz and her team's main challenges in this case. A snowfall caused Peter to ask his veterinary cousin to investigate the corpuscle instead of flying in a forensic specialist. The veterinarian concludes that the males most likely died from cardiac arrests caused by pure panic and that they passed away before they froze. Oliver Tagok, a former equipment engineer, is ultimately located by Navarro and Liz in a nomadic settlement. They inform him that every scientist he collaborated with has passed away. He expresses amazement and distress at this news, but he also explicitly inquires about the director and founder of the Salal research station, Anders Lund, or Sten Bachmann. Other than Clark, Lund is the only scientist still alive. Lund, who was discovered amid the corpse, had suffered from gangrene, many amputations, and vision loss before being placed in a medically induced coma. Liz and Navarro pay him a visit in the hospital in this episode. He informs them between his cries of agony. She is currently out on the ice after we woke her up. In the dark, she came for us. There have been rumors that she is awake since the first episode. Part 3 of True Detective, Night Country, has demonstrated how Navarro is somehow directly connected to all of this magic, mystery, and terror. She admits to Liz at the start of the show that she frequently considers simply leaving. Navarro tells her lover, Eddie Cavic, Joel D. Montgrand, who owns the bar and cafe in Ennis, that her mother never gave her an indigenous name before her disappearance. She is still hurt by this lack of connection, particularly after talking to Oliver, who says she has lost her identity. After landing on the ice, Navarro gets a vision of a toddler wearing pajamas and holding a plush polar bear, along with information about her mother. The plush bear Liz had hidden in a box at home is a replica of the one-eyed polar bear she saw in town. Additionally, Jules, Navarro's sister, yells and says, "Someone is coming," after an outburst at work in this episode. All of this leads us to the episode's closing sequences. Liz and Navarro are noticeably upset when Lund informs them, "We woke her up." She obviously has knowledge that we do not. What is known by Navarro? Later, a drugged Lund gets up from his bed, pointing and talking directly to Navarro as Liz leaves his room to handle the turmoil in the hospital waiting area. "Hey Evangeline, your mom is waiting for you," he adds. "Hello," she says. Lund seems to die after laying down again after providing the warning. After breaking into Annie's smartphone, which was discovered in Clark's trailer, Navarro and Liz view a video of Annie in what looks to be an ice cave in the last scene of Part 3. "I found it," she murmurs in the video. "If something were to happen to me." The show essentially ends when Annie lets out a spine-tingling scream before she can finish speaking. We have now officially reached the halfway mark of the anthology's 4th season, which consists of 6 episodes, with episode 4. As mysteries start to come to light, we eager viewers, who, to be honest, have been mostly in the dark all season, have more information to gobble up. There are several leads, some more intriguing than others, but the bigger picture is still unclear. However, Jodie Foster and Carly Rice managed to keep this season together, even at its worst moments. This is as evident as the ice in the cave where Annie Kautok, Neve Pedersen recorded her final words. And this episode, which has Rice's most nuanced, impactful performance to date, doesn't have many of those. Even though our solutions are still out of reach, it's enough to keep you with Night Country because it's star-making material.
See you later. What the fuck are you doing here? Why are you here? So you could look good for your mayor camp. To get you up to speed? All right, copy.
You're perfect, okay?
Let's go.
More of the static white noise that we have heard Chief Danvers, Foster listening to while sorting through evidence is played at the beginning of the episode. This time, her noise machine wakes her up, and she enters the adjacent room to see how Leah, Isabella Starr LeBlanc, is doing. Despite their tense relationship, it's obvious that Danvers simply wants her stepdaughter to be safe in a frightening world, even if it means protecting her Inupiaq ancestry from Leah. A few seconds later, we witness this once more as Danvers tries to make it to the ice rink to supervise the thawed corpsicle and ensure that Anchorage police forensics won't interfere with her inquiry. While traveling there, Danvers sees Julia, aka Niviana, the sister of Agent Navarro, Rice, staggering around in the cold without a coat. After experiencing images of her and her sister's mother, who passed away, Julia's mental health has been deteriorating. "I got you," Danvers says softly and tenderly as he hands Julia her coat and draws her close. Foster is fantastic right now, and I find it disappointing that her season has received more criticism than appreciation for her consistently strong performance. Julia is taken by Navarro to a nearby mental health care facility called the Lighthouse. Navarro informs her sister as they part ways that she will return tomorrow to join her in celebrating Christmas. She will bring Julia's favorite $20 cookies and virgin eggnog. They give each other hugs. In another scene, Officer Peter Pryor presents Danvers with a fresh twist on the Salal scientist investigation, Otis Heiss, a man who was hospitalized in Alaska in 1998 due to injuries resembling those of the scientists in the corpsicle. Pete's check of Otis' medical records revealed that he had self-inflicted bite wounds, burned corneas, and damaged eardrums. Like former Salal scientist Oliver Tagart, who was interviewed by Danvers and Navarro last week, he has vanished from view and is currently living as an addict who moves around a lot.
I can do is it. Why'd you leave?
I had enough. Every matter here.
We have a problem.
Then I'm gonna call a couple guys because you're pissed at me and you... Just get in the fucking car.
Navarro and Danvers attempt to cobble together some fresh facts. According to Navarro, there aren't any ice caves near where Annie was found. Danvers responds, pointing to the bones seen in the cave walls behind Annie in her film, which means she was killed in one place and dumped in another to send a message. The local geology instructor in Ennis makes that portion of the problem much more difficult. There is just one ice cave system in the area, he informs Danvers and Navarro, but it was closed due to several incidents. Julia, meantime, makes an effort to get comfortable in her lighthouse room. Peering beneath her bed to see whence it came from, she gets another vision of her mother. She sees a vision of an orange rolling to her feet, much like Navarro did out on the ice in episode 3. As Christmas Eve draws to a close, Navarro gives Julia a call to check on her sister's adjustment. Julia informs Navarro that she is okay when she is sitting at the frozen dredge outside of Ennis, where Navarro had previously located her. Julia declares her love for her sister as she hangs up the phone. She then takes off her clothing and ventures out into the water and onto the ice. Everyone's Christmas is becoming more depressing. After Danvers tries to discipline Leah for damaging the nearby mining operations, she leaves his house to spend the holiday with Pete. Danvers' vacation soon turns into a solitary festivity, which calls for more evidence analysis and a few glasses of cold vodka. Intoxicated, Danvers deduces that the light in Annie's video was really from a cut generator rather than the flashlight on her phone. Although Oliver Tagak has access to the same type of strong generators to power his residence at the Nomad camp, she demands that Navarro and Peter go question him. But there's no sign of Oliver. The cult-like spiral that was inked on Annie and her partner, Raymond Clark, a missing Salal scientist, has been replaced with a rock. While returning from the Nomad camp, Navarro gets a call from the Coast Guard informing him that Julia has passed away. In order to vent her frustration on the receptionist and a few potted plants in the waiting room, she aggressively drives to the lighthouse and urges Pete to go spend Christmas with his family. She then gets out of her squad car and beats a local mining worker in Ennis who turned him away after she arrested him for assault in episode 1. However, the man and his companions beat Navarro and abandon her since she is outnumbered 3-1. Navarro shows up to Danvers' house a few hours later on Christmas morning, still recovering from her injuries and with a hangover from her boss. When Navarro sees a stuffed polar bear, he inquires as to whether it was owned by Danvers' deceased kid. Danvers interrupts Navarro out of concern that she would launch into a tirade. She tosses the plush animal into the snow and declares, "The dead are dead. Nothing exists save ourselves. Navarro, we're here, by ourselves. The deceased have fucking died." Navarro, at a loss for words, informs Danvers that Julia committed suicide. "Are you curious about her true condition?" Navarro queries. "We go over it one by one. You already know who comes next. Liz, I let her down. You're not understanding. My mother also bore the curse. When something beckons to us, we respond. And now it's beckoning me." While performing the same thing Navarro did on the Wheeler case, their last case together years ago, Danvers informs her partner that she can see Navarro's lost in her own mind someplace. Navarro is informed by Danvers that he is observing something. "In that room, you noticed something. You witnessed something when I was there. It was a spirit or ghost of some sort." When Navarro attempts to object, Danvers accuses her of lying. Navarro attempts to leave, understandably unhappy, but Danvers rushes back out with a fresh text message, a picture of Clark who was seen by a fisherman walking in the snow near the dredge wearing Annie's coat. When the two ladies reach the enormous ship, they discover another spiral painted inside. Danvers tries to get Clark after spotting him fleeing into the darkness on a deck above them. However, she notices that it's Otis Heiss, who was presumably given the coat by Clark, rather than Clark when the Parker hood is pulled down. A Christmas tree lights up in a corner of the deck below, and Navarro goes to have a look. As she turns to assist Danvers, Navarro is confronted with a vision of Julia, blue and drowning, looking directly into her face. Danvers is informed that Clark is gone by Otis, who is just out of reach. He claims that he went back to hiding. He's in the night country hiding. Now, we're all in the night nation. She discovers Navarro seated and gazing into the tree's lights with blood streaming from her ear as Danvers leaves Otis to go get her. As they say, Navarro is in some terrible trouble since another unexplained punctured eardrum has joined the conversation. My initial concerns that Navarro is connected to this whole mystery appear to be confirmed if she is right when she says that whatever happened to Julia is coming to her as well. As we watch the ashes of Julia's corpse being compressed, then eventually filled up in an urn and given to Navarro, who had asked to remain during the entire procedure, the episode begins quite solemnly. She would naturally be part of the process of her sister's last separation as she transitions into a different domain. The deceased are not given much room in Ennis for a dignified funeral. In light of the case under investigation and the way death is handled, Navarro's dignified and moving treatment of Julia is noteworthy, particularly the way he decides to shatter thin ice and scatter the ashes in the river underneath it.
You said that he would.
She
All right. Tell me.
Hallie. My ears all gone to shit.
However, it is evident that Navarro's visions have become more frequent. Although it is never revealed, Navarro's encounter with the dead in the previous episode may have been the reason. The fact that Otis Heiss may have reverted to reality and forgotten the remark about being in the night country certainly makes sense, but once more, this is an occasion in which memories or events from the past are influencing the present. Otis suffers injuries from screaming in the present that are comparable to those sustained by the Salal scientists. However, once more, Raymond Clark was the only person who had shown interest in him. He had inquired about the nature of his injuries before vanishing into those caverns, saying repeatedly, "She is awake," and "I have to hide." Danvers flatly rejects Otis' offer to help him lead both him and Navarro, but only if it means giving him his fix. Instead, Danvers and Navarro investigate the site, which they think is the entrance to a cave at a remote sky mining facility that was purposefully destroyed and closed off. Director Issa Lopez's focus on establishing a connection with the first season's markers also recurs in episode 5. Because Pryor is focusing entirely on the case rather than self-actualizing his conduct with his fiancée, the young Pryor brings in a result of financial investigations, which leads to him being evicted from the house and forced to stay at his father's house. His strategy was successful as Pryor had finally come to the conclusion that Tuttle and Company had funded Salal and, in fact, owned Sky Mining. Therefore, 2 + 2 indicates that the mining firm has a direct stake in the Salal case. However, Sky Mining is also inextricably linked to the way of life in Ennis, Alaska.
This game you lost. On purpose, didn't you?
To get how vulnerable she's making herself.
You know what? Don't come telling.
You okay? What? Why? It's a true.
Additionally, Leah's involvement in the demonstrations against the mining activities reached a boiling point. When the administrators of Sky Mining summon the troops, Navarro must accompany them with her riot shield and SWAT gear in order to disperse the demonstrators. Navarro becomes enraged when one of the trigger-happy troopers manhandles Leah, as is typical. The demonstrators become sidetracked and start applauding the fistfight after she hits the trooper directly. Thus, Navarro becomes Leah's savior, and their bond, as well as her annoyance at being able to relate to Danvers, makes it abundantly evident how closely the two women must be related. Additionally, Navarro wants Leah returned home and left alone, despite her seeming toughness. Danvers, on the other hand, gets Leah arrested because she wants her punished. But Danvers is thrilled to finally confront Ted Connolly and Catherine McKettrick, the CEO of Sky Mining. She questions herself about her and Navarro's hike close to the cave-in, but she also feels caught off guard when she first encounters them. Before Connolly drops a bombshell, she is questioned about the case's specifics and, most significantly, about Otis Heiss.
Only a daughter.
Danvers is not gonna let this.
I don't know what I can do about that. This to Connolly.
Connolly.
Promise.
Yeah, we paid you well.
The Anchorage forensic team has determined that a strange meteorological occurrence that resulted in hallucinations was the cause of death. Danvers and I believe it is a cover-up by Sky Mining since Salal was complicit in fabricating pollution figures and removing Sky Mining's name from the ledger while, in fact, they were the ones who ruined the ecosystem and the water supply. Connolly ends the case by reminding her that the Wheeler case was a murder-suicide, even if it wasn't one. This is as McKettrick attempts to dismiss it and Danvers tries to get a rise out of her by bringing up her romance with McKettrick's husband. Danvers is silenced by that. This season, Hank Pryor has been portrayed as Danvers' hesitant second-in-command, and he clearly does not enjoy his position in the force. This is made very evident when we witness him meeting McKettrick behind closed doors and discover that he had been in charge of transporting Annie's body after Annie was killed in exchange for a position as Ennis, Alaska's police chief. In order to realize his goals, McKettrick now wants Hank to make sure Otis Heiss vanishes before Danvers pursues them to the caverns. Importantly, Hank's nervousness is partly a result of the younger Pryor's intimacy with Danvers, which irritates him, given that Hank had to use an ice pick to break the ice after his child accidentally broke through thin ice and fell into the freezing water, and that Hank had been in charge of saving him. It makes sense that Hank would want the same level of respect from his son, possibly to make up for the lack of respect he feels is being shown to him. But in the end, Danvers' case is ruined by Hank's intervention and Peter's intimacy with his father. Danvers tries to inform an ecstatic Navarro that their investigation is finished because Connolly is aware of the Wheeler case. Navarro had finally discovered that the stone with the spiral used to be signs warning people to avoid these ice caverns known as Night Country. However, Navarro has also given up. Declaring, "You carry her now," she assigns Danvers the responsibility for the Annie K case and, in a last act of defiance, frees Leah. We see Danvers play, ask the right questions, once more, this time pointing at Peter as he confronts him. Peter is a clever dude, too. Because all the photos had been inverted, he deduced that Wheeler had been left-handed, that the gunshot wound at Wheeler's neck had been to the right, and that all of the bruises that were placed on the girlfriend's face and body ran from right to left. Peter had discovered that Navarro and Danvers had staged Wheeler's murder to seem like a suicide, and Hank had done the same through Peter's research, submitting it to Connolly for leverage. His father only looks like an idiot, in fact. After this treachery, Peter is reluctant to return to his father, so Danvers offers him the key to the hut in her garden. Danvers and Leah's tumultuous relationship constantly seems to be on the verge of collapse. As Leah is getting ready to wash up, we see her drive up to Kayla's house, where Leah frequently goes, and notice her daughter's injuries. She also finds out that Ennis, Alaska, has seen 9 stillbirths to date. Though Leah hasn't given up on her yet, this is now getting personal, and when Danvers drives up to the morgue and discovers little coffins kept in a warehouse, she comes dangerously close to giving up. She is unable to bear the guilt. Entering the caverns to solve the case is the only way out. Danvers refuses to go to sleep as Navarro pulls up to Carvick's house and simply sleeps for the night, embracing him and covering his lips since she is unwilling to answer any inquiries at the moment. Instead, as she gets ready, she breaks Heiss out of the lighthouse, takes him to her cabin, and feeds him heroin to wake him up. She had no idea that Hank had been following her, and before she could get ready, he had knocked on the door of the hut. When she opens the door, Danvers is taken aback, thinking it is Navarro. She is also perplexed by Hank's apparent knowledge of Heiss's presence with Danvers and his intention to apprehend him. When Heiss emerges from the restroom to see 2 policemen, he panics and tries to flee, but Hank shoots him twice in the head. After hearing the ruckus, Peter enters the room, finds his father brandishing a pistol, and aims his own gun back at him while Hank continues to point the gun at Liz. Hank admits to relocating Annie K's body during the standoff. In the meantime, Danvers is telling Peter to reconsider and not do it. For Hank, this may mean killing Heiss, then killing Danvers as a precaution, and having Peter help clean up and conceal the body because, as he declares before pulling the trigger to shoot Danvers, blood is blood. At that time, Peter might have been waiting for his father to do something stupid, but his loyalty to the Danvers had been unquestioned. He couldn't believe he could murder a man, much less his father, though, even as he moves his revolver and pulls the trigger, killing him squarely in the head. It is loyalty, though, and as flimsy as it seems, it is about doing what is right in a world that is gloomy, threatening to be blanketed by snow and freezing cold, freezing the blood in their hands. So, when Navarro walks in, there's no time. When she sees the gruesome scene, she instantly prevents Danvers from phoning Connolly. This is a man quite satisfied with letting Pryor and McKettrick ignore the bodies and allowing the clumsy conclusion settle his cases. A more plausible scenario would be that Hank grabbed Otis and murdered him during the inevitable altercation. After that, Hank is unable to be seen, and a few days later, his truck is discovered, most likely abandoned by a slab avalanche, and his corpse is lost in the snow. Ennis doesn't respect the dead, and since Peter is the only one who might ever call upon Hank, it's likely that Peter isn't in a rush to overlook his father's failings. Instead, he is prepared to learn how to make bodies vanish from Rose, who would also be responsible for cleaning up the crime scene. Navarro and Danvers drive toward the ice caverns as the episode comes to a close. Night Country's fifth episode closes on a cliff of interpretation. Starting on New Year's Eve, Part 6 spends nearly its whole duration closely focusing on Danvers and Navarro. Really, it's a quest episode, and it begins with the police breaking through the ice and carelessly plunging into the maze below. Nothing in this location feels safe, despite Navarro's insistence that it is. The ladies appear to have been completely ingested by an Ice Age beast, since the caverns resemble a frozen digestive tract. The episode opens with Navarro hammering away at the ice and cracking open the entrance to the ice tunnels, often known as the Night Country. Once inside, Danvers and Navarro appear to hear voices that cause them to go off course and plummet through the floor to a different stratum of the ice caverns. For a split second before he vanishes, Navarro is able to find Clark. The voices, which may have been produced by the low-energy hum emanating from a makeshift laboratory in one of those caverns, are eventually followed by both Danvers and Navarro, who acquire frozen slabs that most likely held the permafrost that the Salal scientists had been testing. The second finding is the star-shaped weapon that gave Annie K the about 30 stab wounds. It turned out to be a screwdriver-style tool in the laboratory. However, the most significant finding was a ladder that Clark had used to get away. On December 31st, while a blizzard engulfs Ennis, Alaska, Danvers and Navarro ascend the ladder and unlock the hatch, only to discover that they have reached the kitchen section of the Salal research station during this time. The detectives try to find the enigmatic Clark. Danvers escapes and enters a walk-in freezer, where Clark locks her inside. Clark ambushes her and strikes her in the head with a fire hydrant while she cries for Navarro's assistance. Danvers snatches one of the steel handles on the locked door and beats on the glass door until it cracks as Clark starts to pull the unconscious Navarro. When she finally breaks free and runs to the cries, she discovers a conscious Navarro severely hitting Clark. Danvers reminds her that they need him to speak as he hardly pulls her away. As a result, during an interrogation, Danvers and Navarro strap Clark to a chair and apparently waterboard him as Annie's voice plays on Navarro's phone and tape is placed around his lips and head to prevent him from yelling. It's puzzling that Navarro chose to inquire about Clark's affection for Annie K out of all the topics she might have asked, most likely in an attempt to provoke the torture technique. Danvers and Navarro don't have to wait long for Clark to show off his internal organs after finally loosening him, after eating coffee and, strangely enough, Funyuns. Salal's true motivation was revealed to Annie after it was revealed that Clark had neglected to secure his notes.
I have to do something. All right? I need to do this one.
Julia, too.
Since the heat generated by the mining site's operations would be sufficient to thaw the permafrost containing the magic DNA that might hold the key to solving some of the universe's unsolved problems, such as curing cancer, it turned out that Salal Research Station required silver sky mining to produce more pollutants. In her wrath, Annie decides to demolish the makeshift facility behind the hatch, destroying years of scientific studies and several permafrosts in the process. Annie had been looking for a paper trail that would connect the station to the mining corporation. It turns out that silver sky mining was required to generate more pollutants for Salal Research Station because the heat generated by the mining site's operations would be sufficient to thaw the permafrost containing the magic DNA, which may hold the key to solving some of the universe's unsolved problems, such as curing cancer. Instead of finding the paper trail that would link the station and the mining business, Annie discovers the temporary facility behind the hatch, which she decides to demolish out of wrath, destroying years of scientific work and several permafrosts. And who did she leave her tongue at the crime scene? Though he speculates that it may have been done after the corpse had been transported, Clark is unaware of it. Furthermore, Clark was unable to communicate to his co-workers what had transpired that evening. He still thinks that his co-workers were killed and turned into corpses because of Annie's vengeful ghost, which tormented them. His sole evidence of any such incident is the sounds he heard when his co-workers were likely murdered while he was hidden behind the hatch ladder, holding the hatch for days or weeks without realizing it. He had only been observed by one of the employees because he had had to come up for food since he was hungry. He had looked for Otis Heiss because he believed that since time is a flat circle, Annie's soul, which had been before him, would continue to exist long after he was gone. True Detective, Season 1 reference.
What happened to the...
Hey, you found him.
In hiding in those caves.
He'll talk.
In the meantime, the third detective cleans up the bloody shed, loads the bodies of his father and deceased Otis Heiss onto his trunk, and then takes a shower to wash off the blood. Additionally, he is able to deceive Leah, who had apparently come to make up with her stepmother, but she quickly recognizes that something is wrong and that he is troubled by his tense relationship with Kayla due to Pryor's apprehension. It would be beneficial if he returned Leah to Kayla's house. When Kayla and Pryor eventually face off, Peter asks Kayla to give him one last duty before he returns to her full. Peter seems to be admitting that his father was the one dragging him back more than Danvers. The electricity in Ennis cuts off as Pete eventually pulls up to Rose's house. We see the two of them standing by the thin ice at Rose's apartment after she insists that she accompany him to the location where Julia died. Before directing Pryor to put the victims in the lake himself, Rose stabs into the corpses to release the air, causing the bodies to sink. A son clearing up both his father's and his own mess is lyrical in its own clumsy way. The recurring visions from the previous 5 episodes will also be replayed in this episode, along with an explanation of each character's vision and a resolution for the characters. As Navarro attempted to consume some snacks, a mango would slide out of the refrigerator. Danvers would then peel it in a spiral pattern and place it on the desk. Danvers would be reminded of Holden's vehicle crash by the broken glasses beneath her feet. As Danvers attempts to sleep in her chamber, the cross that Navarro had flung out of the window in episode 2 would end up entwined in her hair. Once more, what it implies much depends on how each character views the existence of the supernatural. Navarro is gradually coming to terms with the possibility that there is a greater power and that there is more to life than this. For Danvers, it means accepting the losses and being troubled by them, but also realizing that there is a certain unpredictability that defies explanation. Danvers discovers that the power at Salal Station has failed when she abruptly awakens in the room she had selected to sleep in. More importantly, Navarro had let Raymond Clark go out into the ice and freeze to death, which is why the generator isn't starting. Now that they are at odds, the two police officers gather around a fireplace for comfort, and Navarro tries to connect all that has happened over the past several days to something more than himself and that Julia has also heard those voices. Since seeing those apparitions during their hunt for Otis Heiss, Navarro's mind has grown more receptive to the notion, despite Danvers' assertions that Julia has given up. Danvers wants to deliver a message to her when she attempts to inform him that she has seen Holden. She is warned that she would murder Navarro rather than listen to any of this since the distraught Danvers isn't prepared to hear it. However, none of these cautions were able to completely deter Navarro, who we learn has been feeling disconnected from the outside world instead of utilizing her rage as a way to re-establish her connection to reality. The dream world, which seems like a dry, arid place somewhere in the Middle East, is what she finds herself embracing as we watch her travel through that freezing snow, her ears bleeding. Her mother ultimately gives her her real name when they catch themselves holding hands. Following Navarro into the snow, Danvers is also plagued by a vision of Holden trapped beneath the ice. She immediately makes an effort to connect, just like Hank Pryor did when he saved his kid years ago. Rather, she plunges into the freezing water, and while she is trapped in the grip of chilly death, she sees the identical vision that we have been witnessing. However, now that Navarro has saved her, he is also saving Julia in a sense. Additionally, Danvers is recontextualized by that accident, and she ultimately decides to pay attention to what Holden told Navarro in her visions. The long December 31st night comes to an end as Danvers recovers, and the northern lights can be seen in the distance. Navarro is told by Danvers to please return if she decides to step back on the ice. It virtually echoes what Kayla wants Peter to do when his job is done, what Leah is attempting to convey with that message, and what Carvick had requested of Navarro. Regarding Navarro, she compares her life to the hatch she had been holding onto. Even though Danvers isn't very good with analogies, the comment makes her change gears. She instructs Navarro to shine a UV light on the hatch after she has poured chemicals on top of it. Danvers finds a very particular handprint, one that is missing 2 fingers, among the fingerprints that attempted to unlock the hatch. The show has made an effort to give us a chance to hear from the demonstrators and the women who are victims of violence, domestic abuse, and stillbirth. The fact that the women of Ennis, Alaska, particularly those employed at Salal Station, are now taking a stance may seem ironic. When Navarro and Danvers arrive at Beatrice's house, they are welcomed and asked their real names. Navarro feels whole when she confidently responds with the name her mother gave her in her visions. In a perverse way, the women share their experiences and demonstrate how the "she did it" is really the collective she. Armed to the teeth with firearms and other weapons, the ladies charge in. They had found the basement makeshift lab where the contents of a fallen bucket slid between the floor tiles, showing the bloody drill that had killed Annie. However, since the mine owns both the station and the law, requesting the support of the law is a foolish endeavor. Thus, they decide to handle it themselves. The Anchorage forensic report, it turned out, had also been correct. Hypothermia and hallucination brought on by the same had killed the guys. The men had been made to strip off and enter the ice without clothing. The ladies just offered the guys to the night country, they did not murder them. The sun has slowly returned to the horizon after several months. We see a recognizable, true detective, scene in which the federal agents question the case investigator. In earlier seasons, that served as the framing device. Today, it serves as the finale. The federal government doesn't accept the idea that Hank struck a bargain with Heiss and was ultimately responsible for the sabotage that caused his corpse to vanish. However, no more narrative remains that adequately connects all the elements. Despite leaving presence, we are aware that Navarro is no longer with us. Along with a taped confession to Danvers in which he articulately describes how Silver Sky and Salal were intricately related to the case, which Danvers has undoubtedly leaked, Carvick has the SpongeBob toothbrush and Danvers owns the polar bear plush toy. Even though Danvers claims that Navarro is no longer there, it turns out that Navarro is still present and visits their summer home with Danvers. Everything was pretty strong, except for the narrative. Everything was excellent, including the production design, VFX, CGI, acting, camera work, editing, and mood. Up until episode 3, I thought the storytelling was good. When they failed to provide any shocking discoveries in episode 4 and continued to imply that something otherworldly was happening, I understood that the narrative and the political criticism lacked substance. While a few story elements remain unresolved, the extended final episode of True Detective, Night Country does address the most of the significant concerns that were left unanswered in the penultimate episode, but not in an entirely disappointing manner. The episode mostly serves as a two-hander between Danvers and Navarro, who spend the majority of it at the Salal station, which works quite well. Despite a few odd scenes that don't align with the characters' goals, it's a respectable episode. For instance, even though Navarro gave her permission to murder Clark earlier in the episode, Danvers becomes irritated when she abandons him to perish. If you like this recap, make sure to check out the OKTV Today's YouTube channel, where we have hundreds of recaps just like this. Make sure you subscribe and click on that bell, so you'll get... Bye.